Hello, and welcome to Let's Talk About Layoffs. I'm Dr. Tracy, and in this podcast, we're diving deep into the world of layoffs, exploring not just the challenges they present, but also the alternatives that exist. Through transparency, courage, and empathy, we'll uncover new perspectives and strategies for both individuals and organizations navigating these complex situations. Join me as we engage with experts, share stories, and provide practical insights. Whether you're affected by layoffs, involved in decision-making, or just interested in understanding this critical aspect of the corporate world, there's something here for you. Let's embark on this journey together, rethinking and reshaping the narrative around layoffs. All right, so I want to take you back to how I even got interested in researching and learning more about layoffs and organizational change. So I go back probably even like 2004. I was working, and by that time I had been in corporate for about 8 years, and I was finishing up, or in the early parts of 2004, finishing up my master's degree. So it actually it was starting my master's degree. So within my master's degree, one of the things, and I don't think I read this for class, but one of the books that I got a hold of was John Kotter. He has several different books about change, and I'm trying to remember the name. I think it had a penguin on it. I still have it on my bookshelf. But reading John Kotter, talking about the process of change and just change in general and organizations and some of the things that started to go on within the organization I was at, I got curious about the leadership's perspective, or a leader's perspective of change, because I felt like, and I even had the perception, that the leaders who were initiating the change or who were carrying it out were greedy bastards, and like, to put it out, really just to put it out there. And other people I knew had felt the same. And I'm not going to say a majority or anything like that, but felt like they were doing it on purpose, and like they were sleeping like babies at night, or maybe that's not a good analogy. They were sleeping fine at night and didn't have a care in the world for the people. It was just about the bottom line of business. And I know that there are executives, not even going to call them leaders all the time, executives that are like that, which is terrible, but it also keeps the world of business moving. So there's good and bad sides to it. It's really harsh because of the people aspect of it. So I wanted to find out more and find out, like, especially if I wanted to grow into a leader or possibly an executive one day, is that like what you have to do, or is that a choice? What's behind that? So during my master's program, I did get to interview an executive at a company. This person was a vice president, and they had gone through having to decide to implement and to manage after a big layoff. So I was able to snag a short interview with that person, and what I found really changed the trajectory of even where I am today, with how I am, with the research that I've done, with the things that I've talked about, and what I've looked at. So what I found out within that interview, and I have a box or two of papers from the early days of my studies. I should really go back and see if I could find that paper. But what I found out was that VP was so compassionate. Some people got to see that side, others did not. They saw what their perception was, what they heard, what had happened. But when I talked to this person, they didn't sleep good at night. They were scared. They didn't want to disrupt people's lives. It may not have even been, it was not a decision made lightly. And I believe, if I remember it correctly, it was kind of like, it was like a last resort, like it had to be done. There were no other options. Now, if you fast forward a couple decades, there are a lot more options, a lot more things that organizations can try. And I would say some executives kind of shy away from that, and they don't want to put in the work. They don't think about the impact that could have versus the impact that layoffs have on people. So that discussion of realizing that there was compassion at that executive level, that there was care about those employees, and it was something that that person did not want to have to go through, really changed my mindset around all of it. And that I wanted to look into more and more. Are there people like this person, or is this person just kind of an outlier, or are there more people like this? And so that was one of the drivers of when I wanted to go in to start my PhD program. And typically, what you're told when you get ready to go into a PhD program, or what I was told, is that you need to have a really good idea of what you want to focus on, what your research is going to be. So even though a couple years out is your dissertation, you start that you have to take courses up front. For your dissertation, you have to have an idea of a concept of what you want to dive into before you even get to that point, or that was in my case. One of the reasons for that I truly believe is it really helps to drive your passion, because the PhD program, and I'll probably get an amen or people raising their hands out there, for those who are going through it or have been through it, um, I had to stop in my midst because it's really hard shit. It's really hard to go through that and to also live your life at the same time, or try to live your life at the same time. There's a lot of people that wait until they're older. So I had, amongst my groups, there was a couple of people getting ready to retire. There were people in retirement, maybe working part-time. But a lot of people that I know even today, and myself at the time when I was going through my program, were working full-time. We're married. I don't have kids, but there are people who have kids. Some wait till they're older. Trying to go through it and wanting that, and really wanting to dive in and have a passion for that research. It's not about how many dollars you can make by having those letters behind your name. It's truly a personal passion that you dive into, because it can be a very long process. For myself, with the coursework and the dissertation process, it took 6 years while I was working full time. I've heard others say 6 to 8 years. Others have been quicker. There's so many different variables that depend on how long it could take you, what you're studying even. I struggle to find people who are willing to come forward and tell their story, even though it was anonymous and confidential. So you have to have that passion that's lighting your fire to continue that journey. And so many other things have to line up. So there are so many people out there who do have that passion, but other pieces aren't lining up, and that's okay. So that conversation really spurred a lot of that passion and drive, and wanting to find out, like, are there more people like this person, like, that have compassion in these kind of situations? Or are there just a whole bunch of greedy bastards out there doing this? And so with my dissertation research, I had the great honor of interviewing 14 leaders, and this is from frontline all the way to CEO, a variety at all levels. I was able to do qualitative interviews and ask questions that were semi-structured. I asked questions to get to know their experience personally and professionally. So before, when they were making the decisions, they were part of the decision making, and all of the interviews, and then implementation. So actually telling people and how they went about doing that. Backing up to the decision piece, it was also how they went about making the decision. So there's not a lot I could find in the literature at the time when I was going through it as to how people made those decisions. So there were 2 or 3 key ways that were put into the decision making, or that I found in my research. Most of them aligned. Most of those participants aligned with those ways that I identified. I didn't see in the research that I did different ways of going about deciding who goes and who stays in organizations. And then I also talked to them about after the layoffs and what did that look like, and were those individuals still with the company? There were some that were let go right after the layoffs, and they had to go through all of that. Like, they were the last person to walk out the door. There were other individuals that, like a manufacturing factory was closing, and they were the last ones out the door, and then the plant shut down. So there were a variety of perspectives and experiences. And for me, that whole experience, I thought initially going into it, is I'm going to gather the insight, I'm going to analyze it, I'm going to share the insight, and really go from there. What I didn't account for, which is so weird to me now looking back at it, is my study was really looking at the experiences of downsizing managers, and it stemmed from this one leader who was so compassionate. And I didn't account for the feelings that it could bring up in my own self. And I remember one of the interviews, I think it was more than one actually, that I did with my participants for my study. And I got off the call and it was just really heavy. It was heavy. And I know that at least one time I cried. I'm typically not a crier. I cried. It was very, very emotionally heavy for me. I did not account for that or think about that when I went into all of it. But that emotional connection helped continue to drive me. So one of my committee members had said to me in my final defense, he said, "You really need to write a book about this. Like, think about that." And I thought to myself, oh my gosh, this person who's done so much research, a lot of his research was outside the US on the topic. He's written many different articles. It was just even an honor for him to be on my committee. And I remember shaking, like reaching out to him if he might even be interested in being on my committee. And him telling me that I should write a book about what I discovered, what I found. At the time, I was like, "Oh my gosh, that's like a lot. I need to think through that. Am I good enough for that?" All of those mindset things. And so all of that self-confidence, that belief that crept in. So it actually wasn't until 5 years later that I decided to write my book. And I think one of the things that stemmed into getting me to write my book too is I had my own experience as like a direct title of a manager. So a few years prior to writing the book, and I was able to see more of the perspective. And some of the people that I interviewed kind of revisiting that insight and that information, and I knew it needed to be shared with the world because I kept hearing more and more about layoffs. And one of the things I had done in the first chapter of my dissertation was to look at the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics Systems. They recorded mass layoffs, and what I had done and what I found later on in somebody else's, their book that I picked up is a comparison of GDP to mass layoffs. And every time you see GDP went one way, mass layoffs went the other direction. So at a certain point, let me go back years later. I think it was about 2017, and it was just in the last 5 years since mass layoffs were no longer reported. It was during the Obama administration that they stopped reporting that. So I don't know if that's picked up again. Definitely something I want to look into. But so I was able to see that there was an impact there, and that validated and let me see layoffs. They don't just happen, here and there and that kind of thing. But there's more. There's a way. There's almost a cyclical reaction, or there's a relationship between those two. So I wrote my book. I put it out in 2017. It's called Managing Layoffs: 24 Tips to Downsize with Dignity. In the book, I go through the 8 themes that I identified. And through my research, 7 of those themes existed already within the research out there, the literature out there. I identified one additional theme that had not existed, and that was downsizing with humanity, which really gets back to even that core of why I decided to get into this, and that leader that I talked to from my master's paper, that compassion and that empathy, and trying to know if you have to do it, doing it in the right way, and if you don't have to run other things that could look other ways. So I published my book in 2017 and I went back to work. I spent a lot of time, not as a direct manager, but as an individual contributor. And so years passed, and I continued to think whenever somebody talks about downsizing or I hear the word layoffs, it's really close to my heart and all the research and years that I spent. So between my own studies, my research, my experiences, my recent experience my experience at the time as a survivor in the organization, and thinking about the connection to my book, and always thinking eventually I'd like to do more with this. But then there was kind of a lull for a while, and you didn't hear about layoffs so much. So it kind of sat dormant. And I didn't think about it as much until it kind of popped up again. But then more and more these last few years, my LinkedIn feed has been so full of people being laid off. It might be a small percentage of a company. It might be a large percentage of like a mass layoff in a company, but more and more companies are laying off. And I know even during the pandemic, a lot of companies had to lay off because of the change in the economy, people's behaviors, things like that. But even shortly after the pandemic started to calm down, some companies started to hire in droves. And now in 2023, so many of those companies are realizing that like they can't sustain this. And with this amount of employees and the change in the economy again, and people's behaviors, and all of that happening for these businesses, those companies are realizing that they can't sustain that employee count to be able to handle the change that they're experiencing now. So there's a lot more layoffs that you're seeing happen, and it really brought this to the forefront for me again. It still kind of creeps me out every once in a while when I look at it and think about it. So one of the things that I wanted to share too was I ended up getting laid off in the beginning of October of 2023. So a few months or a couple months ago now, and I had not experienced layoffs from the perspective of somebody and an employee and a leader at the time, a manager, as somebody being laid off. And I got, I had that experience now, and there's so many different aspects to it. But mentally, I would say it's probably the hardest because it's typically most of the time I'll say it's not about your performance, and almost all the time it's not about your performance. It's just a gut punch. And experiencing that, oh my gosh, I could look at my research in a whole different perspective from a whole different lens, and I did not have that before. So I ended up really thinking about it and how do I do this? And it's not something that this whole thing is looking to make. Let's talk about layoffs. So I was thinking there's so much shame in layoffs and people being laid off, managers laying off people. And I wanted to bring that to the forefront and be like, hey, this isn't always the answer. Here's other alternatives. And you know what? If you do have to do this, typically it should be a last resort. But if you have to do this, here's a better way to do this and to be more humane to your people in doing it. So that's how the concept of let's talk about layoffs from the brand, from doing the blog, the podcast, the free community on Facebook for people to join in, for people who are impacted directly, and indirectly, all of the individuals in the mix. So that's how that came to be, and me wanting to help people who are impacted. So I started this in December of 2023, and it was after I had gotten through my 60-day period. My termination date was over. And so that's how I came up with the concept of let's talk about layoffs. And that's how I got to where I am today. And what I would really like to do is share the experiences of so many other people that have been in this situation and who experience all that goes along with this, and also helping people who are impacted and how they can cope and how they can continue to move through this. I don't think you're ever going to forget something like this, but how do you get the tools and the help you need, the support you need to continue on and to continue on being either as strong or stronger than you are today? So that's the story of how all of this came to be. Thank you for tuning in to Let's Talk About Layoffs. It's been a privilege to share today's insights and stories with you, shedding light on the complexities and alternatives to traditional layoffs. Remember, in every challenge lies a chance for growth and positive change. I'm Dr. Tracy Schroyer, and your time and engagement with us today means a lot. For further insights and resources, please visit our website at letstalkaboutlayoffs.com. Don't forget to subscribe for the latest episodes. Until next time, keep exploring innovative approaches to the challenge of organizational change and workforce management.